So
Okay.
so everybody who's on, we would like to do a disclaimer in the beginning that if you would like not to be seen on camera, we are recording, so you can turn your camera off if you like to. But we love seeing your bright smiling faces on this lovely day. So let's keep it moving. If you could do a little exercise before we begin. I don't want to start it wrong. Let me come off so I can be here with you. Come on, computer. All right. Here I am. Why am I sideways? I don't know why. I gotta fix that. Anyways, that was not a joke. I gotta fix it. Hey, Farrell, do you know what I might have done wrong with that?
I'm not completely sure. What are you recording on? You're on a computer, right?
I'm not recording on anything. I'm just on it. So yeah, laptop. Frank said check my settings. All right, well, in the meantime, while I'm doing that, I will go ahead and share this with you. If you would, take yourself back to a time when you were a child, right? And I hope you're old enough to remember a certain show that most of us grew up with. So if you can hear this, go back to when you were there and think about a time when the world was a lot more simple, at least in your mind. There we go.
With MailChimp, you can design more engaging marketing assets in no time at all, thanks to our AI-powered.
Can everyone hear? Can everyone hear?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Now, for 30 seconds, just close your eyes and think about you when you were watching that show, however old you were. And what were you thinking when you heard those words, or when you knew that show was coming on, or when you knew you were going to go to the park and play? When you saw the people that looked different than you, did you really care, or did you just want to play? Now, everybody open your eyes, please. I'm trying to get my camera on right. Frank said, look at my settings, and I'm still sideways. So I don't want to look funny while I'm talking to you, so I'm going to try to get that worked out. But here's where we can go with mentally, and maybe this is just the effect it's supposed to have. We're exploring the roots of our racial psychosis, because we have to understand that we are psychologically damaged, all of us. If we've been born in this country, or if we've been here for a certain amount of time. I do not mean to exclude people who live in other countries, but racism and white supremacy is global. Therefore, you too have been affected. So going into the roots of this psychosis, I think has to start somewhere. It starts when you're a child, somewhere along the line. Somewhere teaches you something, someone or some experience teaches you to start thinking certain ways. You, a teacher, a parent, uncle, auntie, so a television show or movie, something that you saw made you think certain ways about certain things. Then you had experience to back up whatever that was. So these are the questions I pose to you to think about that we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to shut my mouth in a little bit while I'm trying to get my angle together on my camera and let you do the talking today. Here are the thoughts. Think of yourself as a child. When did you first notice race? When did you first actually notice that there was something called race? Even though the reality is that there isn't. But when did you come into the matrix and start to believe that there was something called race? Second, what was your first direct experience with race, whether it be positive or negative? Think about when was that? When did that happen? Or sometime around, when was your earliest memories of that? And the last question I wanted to pose to the group, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of time once we hear everybody's thoughts. How do you think that affects how you see race today? That first experience, that first encounter, how you felt right then. I want you to do what Diane does, which is to make us go in and feel inside. How did you feel that day when the lady snatched up on her purse and you didn't have any intentions of robbing her, but she looked at you and thought something? How did you feel inside? You know, or if on the other side of the fence, how did you feel maybe when you walked by a group of cats and there was problems and maybe you caught the worst end of a situation? How did you feel while you were healing up in bed and ice in your eyeball? You know, these are things that we have to go through inside of ourselves, and sometimes going back in time to find that root, maybe we can pull it and then be able to grow from there. So with that being said, I hope everybody would like to give you a moment to think about that. And before we even start, Diane, while they're thinking about those things that I placed, would you please put a quick blessing on our meeting today?
Sure. Thank you, Sundiata. And if you know me, or even if you don't, you might hear in my voice that I've started to relax and slow down. And so as this can be a complex topic, but it can also be an interesting exploration. And especially everybody here today, I know most of you, we're all interested in hearing something or seeing something that shifts something so that we can be participating in change. We're at a time of transformation. So everybody take a deep breath now. And I don't want you to relax so much as just take a deep breath, go inside. And let's remember ourselves, as Sundiata brought us to our childhood, but keep going beyond your childhood, backwards, and go into the lives of your parents and just get a sense of where were they, what were their lives like? If they were in the United States, what were their lives like before you were born? And then as we relax, keep going back, go back to your grandparents and feel into what you imagine life, or what you heard life was like for your grandparents. Get a picture of them in your mind, see them in your mind's eye, and see them as young people. And then go back again and go back to great-grandparents. Now we're maybe out of this century, maybe not, but we're turn of the 20th century, maybe we're in the 19th century. What was life like for them? And then let's just see them all in a line and see them looking at you and recognizing that you are the hopes and the dreams of all your line of family. And take a breath here and just feel great gratitude for all those people who came before you. And just know that they did the best they could at the time. They did the best they could. And one more deep breath in and just say thank you. Thank you. Thank you for making it possible for me to be here today. And now relax. And when you're ready, you can relax your shoulders, your face, let everything relax. Let them fade away and open your eyes and come back to this moment. Sundiata, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I always feel better when she does that. I don't know about you guys, but it always helps me to get started right. So I wanted to give everybody a chance to think about those things. I took you to Sesame Street because Sesame Street, I don't know, something that was universal about that show. And as I played the song, I watched your reactions and I saw at least 3/4 of you were smiling. You know, and there's something to be said in that, because if you can go back into yourself and you can go back and remember certain time periods, it's like almost like what music can do, transdimensional travel. You know, you can reconnect yourself with times that existed. And if time is actually circular, then where are we really? And can you go back there? Sure you can, because that's now. If it's in the future too, right? So I'm not to get everything all confused and twisted, but let's jump on in it. The questions were posed. I'll say them again, and I just want you guys to talk, think. You know, this is a loose leaf kind of discussion because we're here to get at the root of what is going to be each one of our individual problems. You know, it's a shared issue, but each one of us had to go through our own particular fires, right? And that's the solution, is to burn your own wood so that you can get yourself right. And that makes everybody correct. So the questions one more time. Think of yourself as a child when you first noticed race. Why don't we start with that one? Does anybody want to speak on that one? And feel free to jump on in. I'm going to encourage you today to just, you know, if you want to raise your hand, that's fine. We should keep some form of decorum, but I also want you to be honest and open. So if you have something to say, nobody's speaking, just speak. Let's hear. Hey, there's my cousin Nellie. What's going on, Nellie Moore?
Hi.
So glad to be here.
Your mom's having trouble logging in, so I don't know. Yes.
I'll try that.
You try to help her? Okay. That's why I wasn't on screen. I was talking to her. I became first aware of race when my brother, who was 2 years older than me, a neighbor that was living next door, she moved away and she was a Caucasian young lady. And I was upset. And I said to my brother's name was Joe, I said, Joe, I forgot the young girl's name. We were about, like I said, I was about 5. You know, we were about 5. And I said, oh, I was upset. I said, she moved away. She moved away. And he said to me, Nellie, their family moved away because you were Black. And I was like, Black? I'm like, I didn't even, at the time, I didn't know I was Black or no color. So that's the first time I really say I became conscious of race. I knew we were different colors, you know, we playing in the mud, but it was never brought up to me until he said that that's because you were Black, Nellie, their family moved away.
Wow. I would just ask you, how did you feel about it at that time?
Being fired, I'm like, Black, I'm Black. No one had ever told me. And what is she? I was just, a 5-year-old. No one had ever, said, "Oh, you black." And we just saw people, and
Mhm.
I was just dumbfounded. So she moved because I'm black, and then later in life you start learning. But that was like my first real of awareness.
Wow. And your age was what once again?
I was about 5. Yeah,
5.
because because we moved out of that neighborhood when we was about 6. So I was about 5 when it happened.
And would you mind sharing what area of the country that was in?
I was in Buffalo, New York.
Mhm. Okay.
Mhm.
Just for context for everybody who doesn't know you. So let's keep it moving. Who else? I know other people have the first time you've been thinking about it. I hear the wheels turning. Look at Susie. I can feel it right now. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, Susie.
You didn't put me on the spot. I'm kind of curious to hear from everyone else, but I think I'll just go for it. I think what I noticed when I was a very small child was I grew up in a very, very white community, and there was one black family. And so I don't know if that was a noticing of race. It was more a noticing of different skin color and what was that about. And then this is very hard to share, but I'm going to share it. My family were really racist, and I heard really just awful terms being said about people of color in my house when I was growing up. And it was very hard because this family were my friends. And I used to play with their daughter, Michelle. She was my friend. And then I would go home and hear these words, and I just couldn't quite marry the two things together. It was very confusing. So I think that was like my experience of becoming aware of race, was being in this super, super white community and there being very, very few, like no people of color except for this one black family, and my relationship with them, and then hearing those things at home and trying to figure all of that out. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Okay, and you said your age was as
I think I met them through our church, and my mum started taking me to that church when I was about 3 or 4. And then me and Michelle carried on going to school right up until we were sort of 15, 16. So it was a long period of time. But yeah, when I was quite small.
kind of young. Okay. Next. There you go, Gabe. Go ahead, jump on in.
All right, thanks. So for me, it's a tricky question because my memory is really terrible.
Don't feel bad. I'm with you.
All right. So I feel like I didn't really notice race until it was explained to me by my mom. And my mom's white and Jewish, and she was a product of the 1960s social movements. And so, when I was very young, she sat me down and she tried to make it clear to me that, people of color in the United States have been and are treated unfairly. And she tried to draw parallels between the African American experience and some of the experiences that Jewish members of her family had gone through. And so it was only really after she sat me down and made me aware of how unfair this country of ours is that I started thinking about it. And yeah, so I guess that's really the first time that it came into my consciousness. And hard to say how old I was, but I think I was pretty young. I think like, I don't know, 6, 7, something like that. But
Around the time when me and you were in class together.
yeah.
No, I think we're a little older than that.
Yeah. And then of course there was the whole like, Agassiz dynamic, which is like Agassiz was in a primarily white neighborhood. And then, most of the African-American kids in the class were bussed in from Central Square or the Port. And so like just that dynamic, was kind of impossible to ignore. It's like, wait, what's going on here? Like, why are, all the white kids in one part of town and all of the kids of color in another part of town, like those divisions were pretty stark, even though, after drop off, we were all together, yeah. So I guess that's what I've got.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Stu, it's not, the thing about this is that it's not very difficult to go back and think of, maybe not your first incident, but something, early that left a stain on you or an imprint in your brain.
Yeah.
So, moving on, hey, I appreciate you guys, get started. Hey, how you doing there, Larry? You're on mute, Larry.
Anyhow, so I'm 81 and I grew up in DC, and DC was not Southern, deep Southern, but it was a Jim Crow town. It was very segregated. And I grew up next door to a Black elementary school. And there was our apartment complex had a sandbox, which I played in, which was next to the fence. And the other side of the fence was the sandbox for the school. I think it was called the Military Road School for Colored Girls and Boys, I think is what it was called. And they were on the other side, and I just made assumptions without anyone ever explaining anything to me that fence was there to divide us, and for reasons I didn't understand or didn't think about, that was the way it was. And my family and my cousins, we all grew up with a Black domestic taking care of us, who was literally a mother figure. And I think that a lot of my love for Black people come from Anna Sweetney, because she was like my mother in many ways. I still didn't understand. I didn't understand what race was until I started teaching high school and started teaching American history. And this is after college and graduate school, and became aware of, it's a construct, it doesn't exist. It's a political construct, it has no scientific basis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I spent the rest of my life teaching about it. But I'm writing my memoirs, and it's all about how I didn't know what Black was. And then after I started to figure that out, about 10 years ago, I started to figure out what white was.
I appreciate that. And I also look at and listen to people who have a little time here, because their perspective on this topic, it just has many dimensions. They've had a chance to see it go from this thing to that thing to the next thing. And I'm kind of young yet, just turned 39 yesterday. Shut your mouth, Frank.
I ain't say nothing.
And, and I've seen quite a few things happen on my short period of time here. So it's interesting to hear people like Larry and Diane and, people who have seen some different things. What's up, Lou? So let me be quiet now. Anybody else would like to join in?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think like the race, but the parallel I keep finding is economics. And like we grew up in Cleveland, and poor Cleveland, so there were very few, if any, white people around. So my earliest experiences are all family, and then a couple of white folks here and there, but it's basically Black. And then as you transition to Cleveland Heights, which is a nicer area, then my teachers were white, and there's more white classmates, and my vision is more gentrified because everything around me is a little nicer, so you see more white people. And then we moved to Cambridge and Agassiz with you guys and Gabe, and I didn't bus because I never made the bus. I was always walking. But you're walking from the coast to Agassiz, and I think Cambridge is very idyllic in some ways because they see that there is an issue and they try to do something. It's not always great, but that city tries to be proactive. So like our experience when we're a little older, and this would have been 7th grade, so now we're 12. My perspective has changed and is very much more multicultural than it had been. But the theme that I keep seeing is there's more money. So if you're poor, you're going to be around a lot of people of color and a couple of poor white folk. As you move up in that socioeconomic ladder, then if you look around, what you see changes. And I think that, I've probably always been, I think as a person of color, race becomes evident very soon. Either you see something or you're chased. Like Larry, we had it was railroad tracks. And so the poor folks were on one side of the railroad tracks and the people with more money were on the other side, or there was that bridge, so they're very, very tangible structures that say this is where you belong and you don't belong over here. So, I mean, like you see that early, and, like your parents don't sugarcoat it. I don't know what it's like on the other side of the tracks. They may go, oh, we just don't go over there. Don't worry about it. You're too young, but on this side of the tracks is like, well, we don't go over there because of XYZ. And if you go over there, then, there may be problems. And you go, no, there's no problems. You go over there and there's problems. You go, well, learn my lesson. I'm going to stay on my side of the tracks. So, I think that but it's always economically based in a lot of ways. And that's kind of, in my adult life, that's what I see now. It's more, it's race and economics that kind of go hand in hand.
I agree with that 100%. And I've been watching a lot lately, and that's a good point, Frank, about economics. Economics is also one of those glues where you can see, if you have crime one place and you have crime another place, it doesn't really even matter about the color. It's like you're going to see that it's linked almost all the time to economics, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, moving on. I see some other people who are anxious to speak. I hear those vibrations. I see Pharaoh, the King Pharaoh in the back with his hand up. What's up, Pharaoh?
Oh, are we muted?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. All right, so I just wanted to say that I also grew up in Cambridge, and I definitely agree that it is very idyllic in a lot of senses. And like you said, that's not the same thing as it being perfect. Doesn't always get it right. My father works for the city and often tries to implement certain things like that to try to improve those sorts of things. And he often talks about how frustrating certain things can be. So that's certainly true. But I think it's important to note the difference between noting, or what we mean when we say noticing race, right? Because like, as other people have already mentioned, noticing that you look different from someone else isn't the same thing as all the social implications and history that comes along with, racial identities. Because I can remember noticing that people look different when I was very young, but that doesn't necessarily have any meaning behind it other than a purely appearance-based thing, and it doesn't have any greater sociological weight. But I think I was also likely fortunate. I think fortunate is definitely the right way to describe it, that I also have a very proactive family when it came to race education, because before I can think of any incident in which I had a negative racist altercation with someone, which I have had, but before I even had any of those, I was taught about these sorts of things with my family.
I know your parents, yes, sir.
Yeah, and my grandmother, who was right
Your grandmother,
and
yeah.
she, I remember her showing me and my cousin Asia very intensive and sometimes graphic racial history movies, and even before I had my first racist encounter. So I was certainly educationally prepared to understand these sorts of dynamics when they happened.
So by that statement, which I think is a very relevant statement from the younger generation, preparation for, you know, what you may be preparing for by those who come from before you is important. Now, this is where it gets tricky and sticky, is how were you prepared for it, right? Like if we listen to Susie, that's the same thing, but it's just from a different perspective, right? Or what she said is to do the very same thing. Like there's something that our families have to do with how we end up, and whether we go with them or against them is up to us. But all those factors are involved. So good point, Farrell. Good point, Susie. Who's next? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll go.
How you
So
doing?
good. I'm almost 60 and I grew up in a very white suburb of New York. My grandparents lived in the city and we all had, as Larry talked about, Black domestics who worked in our houses. These women who were as familiar to me as my family and sometimes more beloved to me than my family. So I have a very strong memory of a very indelible conversation that I had with this woman who worked for my parents. Her name was Pearl Smith. And I was helping her make a bed in the house one day. I was probably about 5 years old. And I kind of noticed her color. So I asked her about it. I was like, how come you look like that? Because it never, I guess, had never really occurred to me before. And she really didn't know what to say. I'm sure she felt like it was not her job to educate me in this. But she was a very religious person, very spiritual person. And she said, this is how God made me. So I was trying to understand this as a 5-year-old. And I said, and you'll know a lot about my mother when I tell you what I said next. I said, oh, it's like a suntan that doesn't come off. And she said, yeah, kind of like that. And we had this moment where both of us knew that we hadn't really like gotten anywhere with this topic. Like we had, it's clear that she hadn't really answered my question. She didn't really know how to answer my question. I understood that there was so much more to it, but I wasn't really getting it. And I think I understood from that it was just a really, really difficult thing to talk about. And I can see it. I mean, I have this memory so clear in my head. And my family had a lot of good words about race. They had the right politics, but they didn't have any Black friends, right? Like they had the platitudes, but they didn't actually know any Black people who weren't working for them. So I think I just had a lot of questions for a long time after that.
That I appreciate you adding the context to what you said. You know what I mean? Because it's a deep apple. But thank you for that.
I'm just curious. Hey, Nancy, did you talk to your parents to go, hey, I had this conversation and we talked about suntans that don't come off? Or did the conversation not go any further than that? It didn't go.
I have no memory of it going anywhere.
Okay.
And if I had asked my parents, I think they would have, like what Larry was saying. It would have been very much in the language of 60s social movements. They talked the talk, but they definitely did not walk the walk.
Okay.
So, we talk about burning your own wood. That's the wood that I have to burn.
Well, that's I really thought that that was honest because that's something that a young person would ask you, something like that. Frank, you were gonna say something? Okay. Uh, just for people who just come in, the distinguished individuals who just popped up. Hello, Miss Cooper. We're talking about, we went back into our childhood and we're thinking about the first time when you noticed race. What was your first direct experience, as well as how do you think that affects how you see race today? So everyone here has been sharing their experiences, trying to go back and think about what was their first time when they thought about race or when they became aware of race. So we've been sharing. I just wanted to catch you up to speed. So, and to share our culture, we have to always acknowledge our ancestors and our, our parents and our grandparents and the eldest in the room. That's why I always do that for Diane, because she is the leader and also a spiritual guide. And whenever there are parental people around, you have to show that respect too. This is how we were taught in the proper households. America has a way of twisting our traditions, but it's okay. Let's keep it going. So, hey, let's hear from Gretchen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gretchen. I grew up in Connecticut, like an hour from New York. And so I feel like I sort of had a very similar answer to Susie, because I think I grew up, but it was never like, I never had a conversation about race, but it wasn't until Diane started having us like reflect on our parents and our grandparents that it actually brought up like a lot of negative emotion, because actually both of my grandfathers are or were very racist. And so growing up, like I would hear terms like really young for any group that wasn't white or even associated with white, whether it was like Italian or just something that my grandfather wasn't. And my parents never really talked to us about it. I think they kind of like brushed it aside with both of my grandfathers. And so that has just had me reflecting based on other things that we've heard in this discussion today, because I think for people of color, you either learn about race through like a very traumatic experience, or you have to be prepared for that traumatic experience. And I think for a lot of white people, it's just not a discussion at all. And there's not a lot of that preparedness that's being done to like address that. So, I moved through the world in a really white town, hearing some of these things and not knowing what it meant at a really young age. And kind of like Sundiata, what you just said too, there's like a level of hierarchy in a family where you don't necessarily like push back on a grandparent when they say something, because they're a patriarch or a matriarch of your family. And then, going into high school and feeling like those really like, I don't see color, like I'm a good person, I don't see color, but no one ever told me that that's more harmful than it is like rainbows, And so I think there's just hearing in the difference in the experiences. I don't know, it just brings to light again how much like these conversations need to be happening earlier for kids, because if you sugarcoat things or if you don't address them for like the people that are the majority, you're not realizing like just how traumatic it is on the other side and how different it is to have to experience race. So yeah, just like a lot of reflecting. And I think, yeah, like reflecting a lot on the things that my grandfather said, and like just wishing that my parents had even tried to explain what that meant and tried to like push back on that and set the example for their kids. So that's just sort of what I've been reflecting on.
That was a lot, and that was good. I like that, because really I was thinking about, that was a good argument against those people trying to do that critical race theory where they don't want people to teach about it. You said a lot of powerful arguments against that just now. So I know we have more thoughts. More people have been children. Anybody been a child before? Raise your hand. Been a child? Hello? Okay, so if you've been a child before, I mean, you got a chance to speak today. And we've heard from a lot of you. If I haven't heard from you, let's go. All right, let's hear from Miss Katie.
Hi. So I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee, and it was like the first suburb outside of the city of Milwaukee. And my first, similar to many of us now, like I didn't learn about it, but it was just something that I noticed. And it was more along the lines of like, Frank, what you were saying about like the economics. So because we were so close to the city line, the street signs where I grew up in this very, very white suburb, the street signs were blue. And then when you got into Milwaukee, when you like crossed the line, the street signs turned green. And as soon as you crossed into Milwaukee, it was not white. There were no white families. And there was this like clear divide of like, and we would drive like through Milwaukee all the time to go to the lake or whatever. So I would always notice the blue signs and like these very manicured lawns and beautiful houses and only white families. And then you cross over green signs and like not houses were like falling apart. There were no white families. There was, and it's like, we just never talked about it. We never learned about it. I wish that my parents had like taught me about redlining or any of that, because like that I think would have been an interesting conversation to have. But yeah, even though I guess my parents had like the right politics, like you were saying, Nancy, like they probably would have said the right things, but it was just never talked about. So I remember noticing that. And the other piece of that is I remember one time my sister and I were taking the city bus like back home from the mall or something, I don't remember, and we didn't get off at the right stop, and I think we were in middle school maybe, and I noticed the signs were green. So I was like, oh, we're like too far. We're in Milwaukee somewhere. And so we got off the bus, and we didn't have phones obviously, so we like went into a CVS and like used the cashier's phone to call my mom and be like, we're lost. And she was like, I remember her asking like, well, where are you? Are the signs green? And we're like, yeah, they're green. And she's like, stay where you are. Like really freaked us out. And like, you know, thinking back on that now, that was all part of this experience. Like we're where the signs are green. Like we just like knew, we had this association, like it's bad, we're in trouble. Like don't leave the CVS and she's going to come pick us up. And she did, and it was fine. But it's like, I associate that whole thing with my first like experience, learning, but not learning, just like feeling the feelings and then having these associations that were obviously not productive.
Wow. So I'm hearing like coding, like, you know, you noticing yourself that there was coding in your environment.
Mm-hmm.
And even, I'm sure there's people who walk around and don't even know that there's coding in their environment. Then there was fear attached. So if I could, you know, I've been writing down some of the things that you guys have been saying, and just in not saying anybody in particular, but there's so many different angles of where this is coming from, just from a childhood experience. And I'm not going to stop because we have a few more people to hear from, but we have things coming from parents. We have parental guidance, one way or the other. We got social constructs. We have the economic tie. We've got the point of view, you know, people being prepared. You have xenophobia on the table. People are afraid of people who are different. Not enough discussion in the white communities about what's going on. And street signs that go from blue to green, deep. You know what I mean? There's a lot. And we've only touched the surface. So as you're thinking, these things have been building since you've been a child. And so how much unraveling do we have to do, and how long will it take before we can actually be sane again? So with that being said, you've said all this, not me. So I'm gonna let you say some more. Go ahead, Diane.
Well, first, I must say that you just said how will we become sane again? And so I'm I'm feeling like we've never been sane. I mean, well, what is that? We're all traumatized in one way or another because we live in white supremacy for thousands of years or hundreds of years. So but as I'm listening, for me, my first experience that I can remember, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I grew up, these years that I'm thinking about are the 50s. So you know, Leave It to Beaver, we have all of that kind of 50s idea that everybody watched on television. But so I've heard a lot of white people say that they weren't prepared. And other than a few, I don't hear Black people saying that we were prepared either. And I never felt prepared. Nobody ever talked to me about race in my family. We just, we had no reason, I guess, to talk about it. I grew up in the Black community. We didn't talk about it. But what I remember, my first experience, now I'm in the 50s, and we were living in the time of the Hungarian Revolution. So we've got a whole group. And if you remember the Hungarian Revolution and you think about these revolutions we're experiencing now and the way refugees were accepted and brought in, it's just an entirely different experience. But in Cleveland, there were a lot of immigrants that were coming in from the Hungarian Revolution, or that kind of Eastern European influx of immigrants. And so Cleveland, where I lived, was a totally segregated. But we were segregated, but not that far distant from one another. So I remember that I got on a bus one day with my mother. So I get on the bus, and the bus was kind of crowded. And as I walked, I saw a seat, kind of an aisle seat. So we couldn't sit together. So she kept going, and I was going to sit in this seat. And the woman who was in the seat by the window, she gave me such a dirty look. It was such a nasty look. And it was clear to me as a child, I probably was 4 or 5. It was clear to me that she didn't want me to sit next to her. And so I took all this whole thing in, and what I saw was an immigrant woman, and she didn't want me to sit next to her. So that colored my experience for many years, because I became aware that we had an influx of immigrants from Eastern Europe who didn't speak English and who discriminated against me. Here I am, a child. My whole family goes back for centuries in this country, and so I'm feeling isolated. You know, I mean, she was just coming through on the bus, so and we kind of lived close around one another. But what my experience said was that even poor, because everybody was poor, even poor white people who were refugees fleeing oppression don't like Black people, do not want you to sit next to them. I don't want you to live in the neighborhoods with them, don't want to go to school with you. And so my feeling was there must be something wrong with being a Black person. And so nothing really improved for not until I was in college did I start to search that out for myself. I found a lot of markers along the way that said a lot of the same things. So, but that, I never forgot about that. So that had to be a very, and I never told my mother. It was something that I knew that, you know, what was the point of telling my mother? What was she going to do? So
and you were 4, 5, you said?
Yeah, yeah.
And that left a stain in your mind till today. You can still remember it.
Oh, I totally remember it. And And everything that happened as a child and going on up to even college. I remember another memory in college in the sociology class. And the teacher passed out a list of rankings of race and ethnicity rankings of people in the world. And what was really, it was so striking, it was embarrassing that, you know, you start off with the English, they're always on top. And then you come all the way down, 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 down. And the very last group, I mean, not the Africans, but the African Americans were were the last group as far as social acceptance or, you know, this ranking, whatever that ranking means, superiority to inferiority. And when I saw that, I said, okay, this is outrageous. This is outrageous. What is going on? And so that is really, I haven't changed my thinking about how outrageous it is until this day.
I appreciate that too, because that's not just the first, that's not going into your mind and just looking at the first time you notice race, but also acknowledging the first time when you said, I'm not taking this, I'm gonna do something. You know, this is ridiculous. Because that is a poignant time in one's life too. For some people, it takes many years to come to that point. But anyway, I appreciate you sharing that, Diane.
Yeah.
Can I say something about?
Go ahead, and then you guys, then Alan and Ma. So go ahead.
I mean, we're talking about when did we first notice racial differences? I think it's I think it's also important to think about when did you have friendship and really get to know and even live with someone of a different race than your own. You know, when you really get to know somebody, I mean, it's no longer intellectual, you know, I mean, and I'll stop because my parents knew nothing about the history, nothing. Jewish, and so they knew nothing about the history of race that they ever shared, right? I mean, I was the one that started to educate myself as a teacher, would bring stuff back to them, and they would say, why are you doing this? And why are you, you know, and, but it's when I really feel like I began to understand race emotionally when I started getting to really know people of African descent, you know, and so I think that's an important thing to explore.
I think so too. Interhuman interaction, getting to know people for real and not just on paper.
Right.
Actually, yeah. Something that you said I wanted to comment on was that self-responsibility. You took a self-responsibility to learn more about what was happening. And whether it came from your parents or not, that's something inside that everybody has to decide. Am I going to continue to be this way, or am I going to take a step and do what I need to do to better myself and learn more about what's going on for me? So I applaud you for that. I said Alan and then Miss Cooper. And Louis, did you have your hand up too, Lou? Okay.
And I'll be honored to follow your mother, who's raised such a fine young man.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Ma.
So before we, Annie, just a minute, we just want to recognize that it's 2 o'clock. And so, so anybody, people have a life, right? Some people, and so you might have something else to do, but feel free to stay on and we'll continue. But I just want to recognize that if it's time for you to leave, you know, be happy, feel free, go off into the day.
And as you see, 2 hours we've been here talking, and that's how quick it was, right? Well, 1 hour, sorry. That hour went by like 30 minutes. Go ahead, Ma.
Okay, I apologize to everyone about my tardiness, but it was not because I wasn't trying.
Callie, you understand?
Somehow the computer did away with my registration, but growing up in Mississippi, you can probably imagine that I have always my entire life been aware of the differences because it was in my face. Wherever we went, I want to add something to the list of codes. The young lady from Milwaukee mentioned the difference in the colors of the street signs. We had the thing about being born on the other side of the tracks. So it was railroad tracks. And of course, you're all very familiar with the separate colors and whites, bathroom, toilets, and drinking fountains. Just the segregation. So it has always been a part of my growing up, and we were always groomed about how to behave and how to act around white people. You look them in the eye, and if anyone saw the Emmett Till story, you know that was one of the mistakes he made was to look this woman in her eye, and there were a whole list of do's and don'ts, and I was not really that familiar with living with white people until I went away to college, and I think I was so used to the separation that I didn't pay attention to it. My first year roommates moved out, but I had no idea why they were moving out, and it took a while to look back and think about why all of a sudden they were in the room, and then they were not. So it's been a learning experience the entire way, and and working with international students, I think just brought a good awareness of how people of different cultures get along with view each other. And it's a learning experience, and a lot of people are still learning. And at some point, we need to reach a point where we can we can judge people by their individualities, their personalities, and how they behave with us, rather than just what they look like.
I want to thank you for sharing that. I also, I'm hearing, and I wanted to comment on what you said about the content of character. That's kind of what you were getting at, is being the ultimate goal. Okay, so I'm not trying to interpret what you said. I was just trying to make sure I understood that. I wanted to say to the group that this is why it's important to hear testimony from people such as Ms. Cooper, who said she really doesn't probably remember not knowing about race because of where she was raised, because of the experience that she had to go through every day of her life till now. And then to see certain things go backtrack and whatever. I wanted to ask you, Ms. Cooper, how did you feel when those people started moving out of your room? When you kind of put piece together that could it be because I'm darker than them? You know, how did you actually feel emotionally?
I was impervious to it. It didn't matter what way or the other.
Wow.
If they moved out, I had a single room. So it's fine.
That's survival right there for you. Marcus Garvey will tell you. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. So, Alan, would you like to share with us? I appreciate you giving respect and letting her go first.
Well, and that, my lesson learned there is by giving respect, it teaches me something, and relating, almost bringing us back to that psychosis piece that you started us off with today. And then I will share my awareness, but.
So Alan, can you sit forward?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Really breaking up.
I'm sorry.
Okay, that's better. You sound more.
I'm not sure. It may be hearing aid is going through the computer, so that may be part of the challenge. Is it still breaking up?
No, it sounds much better. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. But I was thinking, even where it's this, very explicit type of division and separation that Ms. Cooper was describing, in Mississippi, I think the insidiousness of the stuff that's not out in the open and the stuff that I grew up with, where, if she was saying she was aware of it all the time, I'm going to say that I wasn't aware of it most of the time, but inside I was knowing it, I was taking it in, and it's that stuff I'm still processing now. But back to my story, this same question was asked in circles of voices in Baltimore by the facilitator, J.C. Falk, and he asked us to pick someone, sit with them, and answer that same question. And the woman that I was sitting with, this Black woman, said, I was 8 years old. One day I was sick. I went with my grandmother, or school was closed. I went with my grandmother. She took me in the back door of a house, and I found out that she was cleaning their house. And why did we have to go in the back door? And her grandmother explained it to her. And this was her story of her awareness of race that she was telling me. And my story that I followed with was similar to some that have been told today. The maid who took care of me for 12 years of my life, Helen Dublin Smith, probably my first, encounter with, I would say, race. I'm not sure about, again, the awareness of. She was a caregiver. She was a second mother, like others have said. The real awareness would be that when we either would drop her off or pick her up at the railroad station on Long Island, outside of New York City, outside of Brooklyn, and the train coming from Brooklyn, and you would see streams of Black women coming down the steps in the train station. And you knew there was a separation, you knew there was a difference. Just one other piece, that resonates for me, and I hadn't even thought about this until this discussion today. Yes, I understand whiteness, I understand white privilege, but I think the culture that I grew up in my home was much more focused on Jewish and not whiteness, and this kind of how my grandfather and my father, how they were treated differently, how Jews were treated differently. And in talking about this today and in talking about some of the coding, I realized the neighborhood we lived with in Valley Stream on Long Island, 90% Christian community. There were our neighborhood, which was 2 streets, Fenwood and Ashley Drive. Out of the 30 families, 25 of the families on that street were Jewish. And I'm not so sure we self-selected that. I think that was probably a carve out for 2 reasons. Number one, they were single family homes adjacent to then garden apartment complexes. So that's what we were next to. And I lived directly across the street, and our whole neighborhood directly across the street from the garbage dump, with an incinerator burning garbage every day. So whether that was a carve out for where Jews were going to be allowed in that community, I never thought about it. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you for sharing. I had a question for you though, and that is, I think there were 2 comments today that were made by, I think Larry made the other one, about Jew. And do Jews consider themselves white or no? When people are talking about, when we're discussing race, because this is something that I've heard in different conversations, and sometimes I'm a little bit confused.
I've said this, and this actually probably got me fired from my final job, which was fine because I retired after that. But I made a statement at a workshop session where we were talking about data and equity. And I would say for me, and the way I was raised, it wasn't white supremacy. My upbringing was Jewish supremacy. That the way we were brought up, my family, we were special, we were better, we were smarter. And I'm not speaking for every Jewish person. I'm talking for Alan Gutman. And so that was more of my perspective. It wasn't so much a whiteness and a white privilege. I felt like for me, there was as much Jewish privilege as you could have, because I understood there was also disadvantage as well, in terms of how you could be treated. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that, again, that's my individual experience.
It came up because you mentioned that you were figuring out how that placing came with the community, whether it was on purpose or whether it wasn't. So there's been a history of, racial issues, intra-racial issues, or I don't know how I'm saying it, but it's not just black and white thing, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a good question, Dee. I don't really come from a particularly Jewish household, but we certainly benefited from white privilege, and you know, identified as white, and self-identified as white, and yeah, but it's hard for me to say like what how a larger Jewish community might answer that question. I can just sort of tell you where we're at, you know.
Appreciate that, Gabe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you get both sides, right? You identify as white and you get privilege, but you also experience anti-Semitism. It's complicated. It's all complicated.
Ms. Cooper, you had something to say too?
Yes, I want to the on the fact that certain that Jewish people are not all of European side, that there are different separations, and probably I think they're called Anasazi Jews have are the ones who get who have received more privilege. They're 13% of the group are of color, Hispanic and Black.
Lou.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. Go ahead, Lou. Would you like to join in?
I had an experience I wanted to share, but Diane, you're going to love this.
Okay.
I promise. I'm very uncomfortable talking. We're here to talk about our first racist type experiences or what we noticed. And now we're talking about Jews, and I'm Jewish. I don't want to have this conversation. I just don't want to have it. This reflects a kind of, it just reflects, again, like we as Jews are white people. Just get over ourselves. We are white people. We have benefited tremendously. And I've had anti-Semitism directly. I grew up in neighborhoods where I was called the Christ killer, got in fights over it. I'm the same age as some of you. But can we stop the discussion about Jews? Because I'm not here to talk about Jews and what our experience is. Straight up not here to talk about it.
You know what, Lou? I agree with you. We weren't actually going to go too deep into it. I really just want to know.
I'll share an experience.
Go ahead.
Having grown up in Black and brown neighborhoods most of my life, I had all different kinds of stuff, but I want to talk about my own racism that came up for me. I moved to a place called Montclair, New Jersey, which was upper or middle upper class town when I was in high school. Before that, I was in Brooklyn, etc. It doesn't matter. I only knew Black people who were poor and not particularly educated and not professional. So my boys were, you know, we were hood rats, right? I come to Montclair, and all of a sudden I meet Black kids whose families are doctors and lawyers and dentists. And it was mind blowing to me. I had no idea. So my own racism, even though, you know, I thought I was down in the neighborhood, I had this view because I had no other view of it, right, at all. And I actually lived, and it was actually liberating for me, if one can say it's liberating to notice your own racism. But it's like, I just had this stereotype and it fit my stereotype of the neighborhood. So there was some gifts in moving to Montclair and seeing all these folks and seeing, you know, not a lot, but, you know, I wasn't in the higher tracks, but, you know, higher track kids, you know, they were studying, you know, calculus and AP English and social studies. That was some of my deepest experiences as a white person who thought he was down and understood what was going on, to say, am I allowed to curse in these? I forget.
Express yourself.
Okay. you know, I thought I was one of these down white motherfuckers who, you know, he was down with everything. And I finally saw, oh my God, you know, and I'm not blaming myself. I'm really not. But that doesn't mean I don't take the blame for my own thinking, right? I didn't have any experience. You don't see him on TV. You don't see anything. So it blew my mind away and actually expanded my own understanding of stuff. And so I just want to say that. And then the other place where is in my family as Jews, because they were kind of progressive, there's a word for Black people that was not allowed to be used in my house. Absolutely never used. My grandfather threw his brother out of the house and never to come back because Jackie Robinson was the first Black man. He called Jackie Robinson that whatever word, I don't even like to say the N word, but the N word, but there's a word in Yiddish, and he never came back to the house. So even as a young little kid, I saw some of these things. So I want to just give both sides of that experience, understanding and still narrowed view of the world.
I'm a scientist, Lou. What's that word in Yiddish?
I'll use it, but I don't feel comfortable. It's called schwarze, which is black, but it's not used as black. It's in Spanish, there's places where they'll call Black people morenos, which is not morenos meaning Black people. It's the other word. So as a scientist, I will say that word, but you're not going to get me to say the N word. Even though you and I have done podcasts together, I'm still not doing it.
Oh no, that's not necessary. But I've heard that word, and that's I appreciate you sharing it with us. And for those who've never heard it, because if I hadn't heard it, I'd want to know. Just to kind of add a light moment, and one of my favorite comedians is Red Fox, and he had a show after Sanford and Son that he did with this big white guy, and there was one part, and the white guy came in, and he said, yeah, I just saw. No, Fred told him, he said, yeah, I saw a new movie with that guy Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he said, who? He said, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He said, you mean Arnold Schwarzenegger? And Red Fox said, not in this house. So anyway.
So let's I want to make sure that Frank, can you talk about the upcoming events? And I want to, while Frank is thinking about that and unmuting, the next informal that we have will be Lou Gittleman. And it will definitely be one to attend. So that'll be April 2nd. Again, the same time frame, 1 to 2 on that Saturday, April 2nd. And the topic will be moving from idealism to activism. What does that mean, and how do we do that? And I think about what Alan said at the last one of, you know, learning how to walk your walk in a real way. So, and also what Lou will bring up, which will be really exciting. So Frank, can you tell us about the next one, April 23rd?
Yeah. And I think just to kind of put my recap of what I see, I think it's illuminating and fascinating. And I'm really thankful that everyone is here, because we're all on separate journeys. We all had different experience. Like we can see there's themes that are the same, but how it impacted us is all different. And you know, there's something, either something happened to you, or you heard something and it didn't stick right with you, or someone told you it wasn't right because you know, they made you feel it. And at some point you start to figure out how to get whole with that, or how to rectify what happened. And that's why we're all here. You know, we're all here, we're sharing our stories. And there was some turning points, like you're walking down the road and you hit a crossroads and you're going to go one way or the other, and you keep going one way, and then eventually you go that other way. And it's someone, I forget, it's hard to speak out against a parent or a grandparent. It takes a lot of guts, and it may be years down the road, but you do it. And there's a lot of people that never do it. You know, I know that it's wrong, but I'm never going to do anything about it. And it's just, I'm really happy that everybody's here and saying, this is something that I noticed. I'm on my journey. I'm where I'm at, and I'm trying to see how I can make myself a better human being. And if we're all better human beings, it's a better world. So, I'm just very encouraged that everybody is taking that journey, and we're all here and able to share with each other. And, we may not all agree on everything, but it's a space that we can come together. I can say whatever's on my mind, and people will like it or not, and they'll question me or not, but that's how you grow. It's like, well, it's a community, and I'm happy that we're all here together. So for the next event, April 23rd at noon, it's going to be the first of the race retreat series, where we're going to be talking about reparations. So it's advantage versus adversity, opening the door to reparations dialogue. So it will be one of the longer formats we have, that there will be people presenting information. There's going to be what we call the fishbowl, where we allow people to kind of, similar to what we're doing here, where you allow people to really get in and say what's on their mind, but then we have an audience that gets to kind of participate and watch as well. And then we'll have some small group sessions and then finish up. So that's the first at noon. And the tickets are all on Eventbrite. This will be a ticketed event. So again, like I said, if you go to Eventbrite, you find the Racial Justice Collaborative and you follow, you'll always get our upcoming lists of events. So please ask you go out and look for that one and get a ticket. And I'm really thankful everybody came.
Frank, there's an article in the New York Times today about legislation. I believe federal legislation as opposed as Commonwealth, because that would have been the Globe. I get both papers about reparations.
Okay.
I actually, the article was poorly written and I couldn't understand what the proposal was, but there's legislation about making reparations.
But it's there. I mean, and that's the thing, is like people are actually talking about it. And it like we're talking about Cambridge and how they try and do as best they can. It's not perfect. Some's better than others. That you actually see real politicians talking about reparations and real policy. It may not be great policy at this point, but we're having real conversations about it. And it's important that, we have a place at that table, because we all have an interest in making sure that it's what we would like to see. So it's important to read those poorly written articles. I'll have to look for it and try and decipher what they're saying and go, well, that's great. Let's keep talking about it. And that's the only way that change happens, is got to talk. You have to make those personal kind of connections to people and see who folks are, and to really get a sense of what we're doing.
So to help give those people who may not be as versed in the subject, because this is something that's very, very right here for those of us who look like this. But if you don't know, HR 40 is the House rep, is the thing that they're discussing, and it's been on the table for over a year. And there's a congresswoman, I cannot recall her name right now, that's making a very big push for them to, actually they're at the stage of coming up with the commission to start talking about what to do, start talking about how to figure this out. We're not talking about actual doing something. We're talking about coming up with a commission so that we can start discussing. And so what she's saying is that many people are putting pressure, over 350 businesses and organizations are putting pressure to say that this is something that can't be delayed. It needs to be pushed. Let's get to it. Stop fooling around. You've had over a year to do some things. And this is even what the reporters are asking. So, if you want to do more research on it, look up HR 40. It's also linked in with the George Floyd bill, both of which are being slowly moving along. So if you can do anything in your capacity, your community, do what you can do. If you believe in it and you know that that's right. I would hate to leave this thing with everybody telling their first example and I don't tell mine. The funny thing is that as I thought about it, I don't remember my first racial experience. I was raised by somebody who taught me about racism from very young. The difference was that she didn't teach me about don't go looking people in the eye. She taught me you look them in the eye. She didn't teach me about you know, let people smack you and spit on you. She said, you know, put their hands on you, put your hands back on them, which is in how I ended up getting down with martial arts and things like this. This is all from that kind of spirit, which says that, you know, you have the right to live, you have the right to exist. You know, these things have to change and you have to be ready to roll with that change. So thanks for that, Ma. Moving on, I would say that my first experience at doing something that's almost on a bizarro world style, I was riding my bike one day. I was like 8 or 9. And I was riding and there was this brick wall with these bricks that was sticking out of it. And one of my handlebars hit the bricks and I fell and I skinned my knee. And when I skinned my knee, I skinned it to the white meat. And I said, oh, Lord. I looked at my knee and I said, what in the world is going on? I didn't know this as a child, you know, so I was indoctrinated into all this stuff, dealing with color. I understood what my, you know, complexion was, but then when it was ripped away, I was like, whoa, okay, so does everybody look like that under, you know, you start asking yourself questions, kid questions, you know, and then am I catching all of this business because the top part is different? You know, these are, so then you get into the politics and the economics and history and all of that. And then you say, this is a real onion. I'm not going to use any bad language I would like to. But so I shared that. And I hope that by doing this, by this exercise that I was trying to do with and sharing with all of you, was to get you to go to the root of your psychosis. Recognize that it is a psychosis, as Diane told us. That, you know, this is something that we all have to deal with and have all been dealing with. What are you going to do about it? And can you go back in your mind and figure out what that is and possibly change something or grow from that experience by looking at where it started, right? And with that being said, if anybody else has anything else that they would like to add before we convene. Well, what all hearts and minds do, I hope that everybody wakes up tomorrow and the next day after that, and that you're successful in that each day coming forth. That way we can make it to the more difficult things, but don't forget the small things and don't forget to look up. Peace.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Sundiata. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, G. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great to see you.
Yeah.
You too, Gabe.
Everybody's input.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Lou.
Love all the
Don't forget,
voices.
April 2nd, we're going to come and hear from Lou, and we're going to hear from each other about what does activism mean and how do we do it. We're all idealistic, but so what? What is all of this? How can we together do something, or even separately? Thank you, Lou, for doing this.
Welcome. And I just do need to say this. When I come with my wrath there, it's still with love and respect for people, but I'm just going to say what I think, because that's what we should be doing.
That's right.
We can't front with each other. So I can still respect people and love that you're here and still get mad at something being said. It doesn't mean I don't see the whole person. So I just want people to know that it's, you know, I want people to understand that. Like, it's okay. It's going to get fiery. That's the way it is. As my friend Frank has said more often, and I remember the story, he said to us one time, that's why I don't bring my Black friends to some of this stuff, because people get all out of shape when people get fiery. Like, I don't want to have to explain that to everybody. And I thank you for that, Frank. I remember that story, and I feel like this is a place. So again, much love to people. Still thought what I thought and had to say it. So
happy birthday.
Want to come to my thing, you'll be in the fire, but you can put me in the fire too.
Happy birthday.
Mandingo.
Thank you so much.
Happy birthday, Mandingo.
Appreciate it.
Happy birthday.
Can I leave you with one thought?
Yes, ma'am.
For people who say that, who claim to be colorblind, ask them if they go into a garden of flowers and tell the flowers they're colorblind. They don't see them.
That's an artist. I like that.
Start for the day.